What's going on, everyone? John Matrix here. Hope you're all having yourselves a wonderful day, wonderful evening, wonderful night, wonderful morning, whatever time it is when you're watching this. We're gonna be jumping into some Warhammer Fantasy here with Arbiter Ian. We're gonna check out the timeline of the old world in 20 minutes Warhammer lore, as I said, by Arbiter Ian. Links will be down below in the description, as always, to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Arbiter Ian's channel. So please do me a favor, if you enjoy this video of his, be sure to give it a like, and if you haven't hit the sub button on that man's channel, go over there and do that. He makes a lot of great content and he definitely deserves love. So please do me a favor going over there and giving the man some support. If you'd like to join us as I do these reactions live, as I'm doing right now with my YouTube members, there's a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description. Love to have you guys come in and join our discussions. Get early access to videos, priority requests on any kind of reactions you might want me to check out, as well as some members only Discord channels, etc. So take a look at those. You've been around the channel for a while, decided you want to take your sport to the next level, that's something that you can do. But with all that said, let's jump into this here video. Again, this is the old world timeline in 20 minutes by Arbiter Ian. Let's do it.
Hi gang, once long ago there was a world, an old world, a world consumed in the fires of rebranding mostly, but it's back.
True.
The old world game is out and the world of legend has returned. So in this video, let's peer back into the mists of time and run through the history of the old world.
We'll do it.
If you're relatively new to Warhammer or Age of Sigmar, you might not recognize the old world, but the story I'm going to tell in this video has been around for a long time. Before Age of Sigmar, Games Workshop's flagship fantasy game, in fact the original Warhammer game, was called Warhammer Fantasy Battle. Its setting was a single planet, the Warhammer world. No, not that one. And most of its storylines took place on a single continent of that planet, called the Old World, in the same way that explorers in the Age of Sail called America the New World.
Right.
Over 8 editions of this game, its stories were fleshed out and it acquired thousands of years of history, all of which ended when the game was discontinued in 2015. The Warhammer world was destroyed.
Really? They discontinued it 10 years ago. It's hard. I still, when I hear like 2015, I still don't think that's been 10 years, man. It's crazy to think that it's been 10 years from that already, but that doesn't seem like it's that long ago. But again, it's a decade, so that's actually quite a long time. But that, I guess, goes to show you that now that they're bringing it back, how much of a want and demand there is from the community for the old world.
That was actually written into the story, and its inhabitants made their way into the new mortal realms, the setting for its replacement, Age of Sigmar. But now it's back. Games Workshop have released a new game called, slightly confusingly, The Old World, and the legends and histories of yore have been resurrected like a happy Nehekaran skeleton. So, armed with a copy of the Old World rulebook, let's retell the creation myth of this huge setting and find out how all its factions came to be. But before I start, some disclaimers. First, there's a lot of worlds floating about, so let's just clarify. This place, the entire planet, used to be called the Warhammer world, but now seems to be called the World of Legend. That's the setting, like the mortal realms. This continent on it is called the Old World, and that's where the game takes place, so the game's called the Old World too. But in this video, I'm going to tell the story of kind of the entire planet.
So, like, the old world is essentially like Total War Warhammer 1, the first game, where it just really kind of like encompasses the what would be considered like European continent with, you know, the Empire, a lot of the Empire factions, some of the dwarf, you know, factions, the greenskins, vampire counts, you know, etc., with the chaos kind of up there in the north, and like the Norskin and like Viking, what would have been Viking kind of areas up there, you know, etc. So
planet, more or less. Second, although all of this stuff is heavily based on the original Warhammer Fantasy Battle setting, we shouldn't assume it's exactly the same. We don't know how much is being kept or what will change. So for that reason, though I'm going to use imagery from across all editions, all the lore in this video comes directly from the Old World gamebooks. This is
Gotcha.
the story as it is now. The Old World game is set around the year 2276 of the Imperial calendar, but our story begins millennia before that, and like so many Games Workshop settings, it begins with some magic space frogs. The Old Ones came into the world around 17,000 years ago. They were an incredibly powerful species of travelers, able to move from world to world in great silver ships, and for whatever reason, they had decided that this place would be perfect for whatever unknowable froggy schemes they had. What they found was a cold world orbiting far from its star and dominated by giant creatures, leviathans of the deep, tunneling beasts, great gargants, many of them intelligent, and the most powerful were the dragons. But none of them could stand against the Old Ones' magic. They built networks of nodes, great world engines to reshape the continents. They moved the entire planet closer to its star, warming the climate, and armies of lizard men and their slan overseers, the servants of the Old Ones, forced the beasts back into the dark places of the world. All except one, the celestial dragon, who
I don't think so. The dragons are kind of their own thing. I don't think they have anything to do with like demon princes.
instead of fighting the Old Ones, chose to observe and learn from them. Over the next 9,000 years, the Old Ones seeded the world with new species. First, the magical elves on their island of Ulthuan, then the dwarves through the World's Edge Mountains in the Old World, and later the primitive tribes of men, and finally the halflings and the ogres, and more crept in too. Stowed away on the great silver ships of the Old Ones were the first orcs and goblins who escaped into this new planet.
Right.
The species thrived, and this reshaping continued for millennia, but 8,000 years before the present day, something went wrong. The Old Ones' power came from a strange other dimension that they manipulated to their will like magic. At the poles of this new world, they constructed two great gates, portals into this other realm that allowed them to come and go as they pleased, but there were things that lived in this other dimension, and they...
Interesting. So the Old Ones in the fantasy universe seem to have had to have used the warp to travel through, right? Whereas the Old Ones in the 40K universe had created the webway to travel through to avoid having to deal with chaos. I find that kind of interesting.
They whispered at the door, eager to get through. They whispered on the winds of magic that flowed from the gates, corrupting some of the younger races into believing they were gods. With every mortal corrupted, their power grew until the great portals bent and broke, shattering into rifts in reality, great ragged holes into the realm of chaos, a storm of magical energy pouring out over the world, so powerful that a new moon was formed in the sky. Morsleib, the Chaos Moon, made from raw black warpstone, the solidified...
Yeah, I didn't know that at all. That's interesting. Like a whole black warpstone moon was created at this point when the gates to chaos in the north ruptured. That's interesting.
Energy of chaos. In the few hundred years after this cataclysm, the Old Ones disappeared, and many of the older Slan, the ones who knew their master's plans, were killed attempting to stabilize the world. Chaos swept over the land, infecting the soil and twisting the creatures of the forests into mutants. Legions of demons pouring from the poles, and the first war against chaos began. Hordes of demons fought legions of lizard men as the servants of the Old Ones attempted to preserve what was left of their master's plans, but the temple cities were overrun, and the Slann pushed back to the southern continent of Lustria. But they didn't fight alone. In the World's Edge Mountains, Grungni, ancestor god of the dwarves, urged his people to fortify their holds, and Grimnir, the warrior god, led huge armies that marched from their mountains to hold back the tide. In the land of Ulthuan, the elven wanderer Ainarian cast himself into the sacred flame of their creator god, Azurian, emerging unscathed as the first Phoenix King of the elves, and alongside the mage Calador, united his people, the glittering hosts of the elves winning many victories against the darkness. And in the Far East, the last of the great dragons, the Celestial Dragon, who'd learned from the Old Ones, looked down upon the primitive tribes of men and took pity on them, fighting back the demonic hordes and insulating them from the worship of gods and monsters. The war continued for hundreds of years, with great losses on both sides. In Ulthuan, a demonic incursion killed Astariel, the ever-queen of Ainarian, and stole away his 2 children. The Phoenix King became a vengeful figure, drawing the blade Widowmaker from the shrine of the war god Cain and setting up court in dark Nagaraith to the west of the island, with his new queen, Morathi. Mountain holds were lost, overwhelmed as their dwarven defenders fell, and in Lustria, the great capital of Itza came under siege from an army of demons. All seemed lost until, in a year described in this calendar handily as -4420, I know, 3 things happened. In Itza, the oldest of the Slann, Lord Croak, finally died. But, set free from its body, Croak became more powerful than ever and banished the besieging demon hordes. In the old world, Grimnir, enraged at the loss of dwarven life, took the first Slayer Oath, cutting his beard and spiking his hair before setting off into the northern realm of Chaos to enter the Rift and kill the Chaos gods themselves. And Calador Dragon Tamer, fearing what would happen as his friend Ainarian fell further into madness, enacted a great ritual, sacrificing himself and many of the other elven mages to create a magical vortex above Ulthuan that would drain the magic from the world, even as it continued to pour in through the polar rifts.
Right. And so, again, from my perspective, from what I know from playing Total War Warhammer games, that gets into like the Total War Warhammer 2 kind of main scenario missions of trying to control these nodes so you can control that vortex, etc.
And eventually, 1,000 years after the Great Cataclysm, the storm of magic subsided. What followed was an age of recovery. The elves crowned a new Phoenix King, passing over Ainarian and Morathi's son, Malarian, and anointing instead Bel-Shanar, the explorer, who founded colonies of elves across the world, while the dwarves spread through its mountains, some venturing far to the east to Zorn Ozkal, the great skull land between the World's Edge Mountains and the Mountains of Morn. The elves and dwarves in the old world became great allies, trading and pushing back those remnants of the war against chaos to the north and to the deep forests. In the Far East, the lands that had been protected from the predations of chaos by the Celestial Dragon united as the empire of Grand Cathay and its astromancers brought forth a great warpstone meteorite to ruin the lands of their enemies, the ogres of the Mountains of Morn, creating a colossal crater known as the Great Maw. But this new prosperity was about to be plunged into disarray again. Malarian, son of Ainarian and Morathi, assassinated Bel-Shanar and declared himself Phoenix King, and a civil war known as the Sundering broke out amongst the elves. Yes. At the height of the war, the dread King Malarian attempted to unbind the magical vortex and unleash the power of chaos over Ulthuan, but he couldn't control it, and the brief surge of power destroyed his homeland of Nagaraith, fracturing it into the sea. Malarian, Morathi, and their followers were defeated and fled over the seas to the north, to the cold and inhospitable lands of Nagaroth, eventually becoming the Dark Elves. But Malarian carried on plotting. Raiders from Nagaroth attacked dwarven caravans in the old world and cheated the dwarves out of their gold, and when the dwarf High King, Gotrek Starbreaker, sent emissaries to complain to Ulthuan, the new Phoenix King, Calador II, was so enraged he sent the ambassador home with his beard shaved. The resulting
Yikes.
War of the Beard lasted 400 years until Calador II was slain and the Phoenix crown claimed as a prize by the dwarfs, and the new Phoenix King, Caradriel, recalled all high elves from the old world, cutting ties with the dwarves and retreating back to Ulthuan. Those elves who chose to remain would eventually abandon the ports and cities and retire to the forest of Athel Loren, becoming the Wood Elves.
Yeah.
But while the elves and dwarves fought their wars, a new power rose as the primitive tribes of men in the old world formed their first empires. In -2500 by the imperial calendar, during the Sundering, Settra united the great necropolis cities of Nehekara, founding a dynasty that would last hundreds of years and send its armies all across the world. 500
They become the Tomb Kings, which are essentially fantasy Necrons.
years later, elven mages from Nagaroth were diverted in a storm and came to Kemri, greatest of the Nehekaran cities, where their knowledge was eagerly absorbed by the Prince of Kemri, a man called Nagash. Nehekara and Gran Cathay weren't the only human empires of the time. The city of Tylos had risen as a trading post of dwarves and men.
I've never heard of them
northern
before,
Tiller,
Tylos.
a few hundred years after Nehekara, but when its citizens celebrated their success with a great monumental bell, and it tolled for the first time, the population were drowned in a rain of warpstone and a tide of squeaking horror that erupted from its mines, and it was consumed by the blighted marshes. So although Nehekara wasn't the only civilization in the old world at that time, it was definitely the longest lived. Maybe that's the wrong choice of words. The kings of Nehekara had long been obsessed by their own mortality, building great pyramids to house their remains, but none had cracked the secrets of eternal life until Nagash, who, as priest king of Kemri, distilled an elixir from human blood to extend his own life, bent the resources of his city to increasing his sorcerous power, and raised legions of skeletons to conquer the whole of Nehekara. But he underestimated his enemies, and the remaining priest kings of the other cities united against him and eventually defeated him. He fled to Cripple Peak, where he ruled over an empire of degenerate humans and undead as he continued to gather power. The next few centuries were known by the dwarves as the Time of Woes. The elves retreated from the old world, and the dwarves came under attack from hordes of goblins and orcs, and even the first Skaven. Where could they have come from? Who knows? Eventually abandoning their holds on the east of the World's Edge Mountains, it wouldn't be until hundreds of years later that some of the lost eastern holds will be retaken. Back in Nehekara, the stolen tomes of Nagash had been long studied by the nobility of the city of Lamia, who created a lesser version of this elixir, granting themselves unnaturally long life, but also a thirst for the blood of the living. When the rest of the Nehekaran cities united again to drive out these new vampires, they found refuge in the court of Nagash. The great necromancer attacked Nehekara again and again, but united under the priest king Alcadizar the Conqueror, they were defeated until Nagash released a magical plague on the land, striking down everyone except Alcadizar, who was brought in chains to Cripple Peak. But while Nagash prepared a great ritual to resurrect the population of Nehekara as a colossal army of skeletons, Alcadizar was freed by some furry allies and, armed with a blade of horrific power, killed Nagash, escaping with his crown. Don't worry.
Interesting. So, like, what is that, the Skavens or those beastmen? I mean, those look like Skavens, right? So, like, it's interesting that the Skavens would work with them. I don't know.
Alcadizar was freed by some furry allies and, armed with a blade of horrific power, killed Nagash, escaping with his crown. Don't worry, he'll be back.
Yeah.
A lot. Anyway,
Nagash
the ritual was disrupted and Nagash was temporarily killed, but the spell was so powerful the population of Nehekara remained animated under the control of their long-dead Tomb Kings, including the original Tomb King, Settra. For the next 1,000 years, the tribes of men settled in the northern old world grew and prospered. In the far west, around the forest of Athel Loren, the Bretonni tribes settled, as in the east, the dwarven realms shrank. Which,
I've said this in a previous video, but I don't know. I don't like Bretonnia as a faction. I don't know. I just don't really care for them personally. I like the Arthurian lore, but I don't know. I've just never been a fan of Bretonia and the games or whatever, and even from some of the stories that I've, you know, read or whatever.
Again under constant attack from orcs and goblins until all the mountains between Mad Dog Pass and Karak Eight Peaks were in
That's true. That's true. The Skaven don't really need a reason to do whatever they do.
goblin hands. The dwarves stepped up trade relations with.
I mean, one of the Skaven leaders could just snort some warp rock, you know, and have a vision, and then they go do whatever they do, you know.
These new human realms, helping Arthur of the Teutogens found the city of Middenheim. A few years later, in the lands that would become the Empire, to the Unberogen tribe, a man called Sigmar
Birth of
was born
Sigmar.
and became a great friend to the dwarves. He rescued the dwarven king, Kurgan Ironbeard, from orc captivity, receiving Gal Maraz, the Skull Splitter, in return, and together they won the Battle of
Warhammer.
Blackfire Pass, destroying a colossal orc army and driving the orcs back from human and dwarf lands for years. The following year, year 0 of this new calendar, a twin-tailed comet was seen in the sky.
And this is where Warhammer Total War 1 starts, if I remember correctly. The twin-tailed comet is seen in the sky that becomes the herald of the beginning of the end times, when Archaon is to unite the Chaos factions and lead Chaos down, and the return of the Skaven, etc., I believe.
And the year after, Sigmar was crowned emperor by the high priest of Ulrich. The next half-century was something of a golden age for this new empire. Dwarves settled in its lands and contributed to its advancement. Orc and goblin raids were kept at bay, and a huge invasion by a resurrected Nagash campaigning north in search of his lost hat was defeated, and Nagash himself felled by Sigmar at the Battle of the River Reich. After 50 years of rule, Sigmar established a system of elector counts to continue governance of his empire and disappeared into the east. And over the next century, he became revered as a god, the patron god of the new empire as it continued to grow. A few hundred years later, the second great old world civilization of man arose as Gilles le Breton united the tribes of the Bretoni and drove the orcs and goblins out of their lands, creating the kingdom of Bretonia. The human realms expanded further, but as the second millennium of this new calendar started, they were plagued with decline. And also, like plague, released by the Skaven, the Black Plague swept through the old world, leading to the rise of the necromancer Van Hel in the spooky eastern provinces of the Empire, in the land of Sylvania, where the Skaven waged war with the shambling hordes of zombies. They were both defeated by Count Mandred Skavenslayer, who became emperor, but when he was assassinated in 1152, the courts wouldn't agree on a new emperor, and so the empire split into a number of separate factions. In 1494, the final human kingdom of this era emerged as the Khan Queen Mishka led the Gospodars through the High Pass and drove back the Ongol tribes. Her daughter would become the first Tsarina of Kislev and a bulwark against chaos invasion. But in the empire, the split only worsened as more electors declared themselves the real inheritor of Sigmar, weakening the land as it came under attack again and again from the same old foes. In 1681, Nagash returned, 1666 years after being banished by Sigmar, and towns and villages across the empire were destroyed by undead hordes. A few years later, the orc War Ironclaw devastated the southern province of Solent, leaving it in ruins. And when the few independent elector counts, the ones not claiming to be an emperor, elected Margreta of Marienburg as the new empress in 1979, the decision was so controversial, the Grand Theogenist of Sigmar refused the appointment. Sigmar's old empire was all but in ruins. The only time a semblance of unity was shown was in 2145, when the various factions united temporarily to defeat Vlad von Karstein, a vampire count who had slowly taken control of Sylvania again over the last few hundred years. And so we arrive in 2276, where this history comes to an end. The empire is fractured. 4 different rulers vying.
I guess actually this would probably be where Total Warhammer, the first one, starts, right around this area, right? Because this is the old world lore, everything that's happened kind of previously to that before the end times. And Total Warhammer 1 starts kind of at the beginning of the end times, essentially.
for the throne and beset on all sides, though in the west, the kingdom of Bretonnia is stronger than ever under the rule of Luon Orcslayer. The Wood Elves guard their woodland realm, though the High Elves, under the rule of Finubar the Seafarer, have slowly reopened relations with these new realms, trading with the Empire,
Carl Franz hasn't been
Bretonnia,
born
and
yet?
distant
Okay.
lands of Cathay. In the south, the reawakened Tomb King, Setra, continues his march of conquest, assaulting the Bretonian client states known as the Border Princes, but for now, Nagash is seldom seen, and the vampire counts have recently been defeated, at least for a while. In the mountains and passes, the dwarves still hold out against hordes of invading orcs and goblins, though a civil war in the Skaven Under-Empire has raged for so long that the loathsome rat men are little more than furry myths. And in the far north, in the realm of chaos, magic still pours into the world, and the forces of the ruinous powers are mobilizing once more. And that's it. We're up to speed.
Okay.
The era in which the old world is set is one that's never really been investigated in detail before. The old Warhammer Fantasy setting was set around the early 2500s, about 250 years after all this. In that history,
Interesting.
all this stuff was the prelude to another great war
Right.
against chaos
That was like the ancient history of, yeah, that timeline.
see the Empire reunited, but we're going to have to wait to find out if that turns out the same.
See, and that's what kind of like threw me off when they talked, when I heard the name of like Age of Sigmar. 'Cause it was like, okay, Age of Sigmar, isn't that like actually like predating what's happening from what I know of in the fantasy universe? Because Sigmar was like the guy that united the Empire, etc. So like, how is the Age of Sigmar happening in fantasy present time? You know, that's what always kind of confused me about that.
Same way. For now, hopefully that's got you in the mood for some gaming in the world of legend. I'm certainly ready to unite everyone under the beneficent and bony thumb of the Tomb Kings, and I'll do more of
I
these
do like me the
as
Tomb Kings, I'm
factions
not gonna lie.
released.
They're one of my favorite
Thanks
factions.
for watching.
Alright, well there we go. There we go, my dudes, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls. That was the timeline of the old world in 20 minutes Warhammer lore by Arbitrean. He always does a good job of doing kind of like quick overall summaries, giving you kind of the important bits of timelines from you know, these different settings. And yeah, so obviously I was incorrect thinking, you know, because my knowledge again comes from more of the of Warhammer Fantasy, comes from the Total War Warhammer games and from stuff that I learned from that. I don't really know a whole lot more outside of that, so I was thinking that this was going to lead up to kind of like where that stuff started, leading into the end times. Because from my understanding, right, there's like the old world, that lore leads up to the end times. The end times is what Warhammer Fantasy was, and then after the end times, then we get into Age of Sigmar. I believe that is how like things are working out now. So, but I guess they're going to cut off the old world a few hundred years before the end time starts, it seems like, I guess. Maybe, you know, something along those lines. So but yeah, it's interesting to, I would like to obviously get into more in detail about the old world and Warhammer Fantasy in general, and some more lore around the factions. Again, as I've said, I'm very interested in Tomb King's lore specifically, but also I would like to learn more about, you know, the High Elves, and that whole civil war that happened with them, and the Dark Elves and Malekith, and how, you know, originally Malekith was supposed to be the Phoenix King, and he got, you know, passed over, and, you know, blah blah blah, that led to that whole thing. And then also the Wood Elves and their creation, the Beastmen and their creation, you know, etc etc. So there's a lot of factions and lore that I still would definitely like to learn more about in this setting. So as we go along, we will continue to do some more videos, reactions, and learn more about it. So if that sounds interesting to you guys, you know, hit that sub button on the channel and join me on this journey of learning about Warhammer Fantasy lore. That's gonna do it for this one, guys. Again, this was by Arbiter Ian. Links will be down below in the description to the original video without my commentary and reaction, and to Arbiter Ian's channel. Please do me a favor, if you enjoyed this video, go over to his channel, hit that like button on this video of his, and give the man a sub if you have not subscribed to his channel already. Makes a lot of great content on his channel, a lot of it for the 40k universe, but obviously, as with this video, he does lore on other things as well. So check out his stuff, give him a sub if you enjoy his content. If you'd like to join us as I do these reactions live with my YouTube members, there is a join button underneath the video, as well as a link in the description to the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. You can get early access to videos, priority in any kind of reaction requests you might have that you want me to do, as well as some specific Discord channels for members only. So, check out the YouTube membership benefits and tiers that I offer. See if any of those have any interest for you, if you decide you want to take your support to the next level for the channel. Regardless, thank you guys very much for watching. I hope you enjoyed this video. Consider leaving a like and a sub if you did enjoy it, as it helps me and the channel grow. And we will see you guys next time. Hope you have yourselves a wonderful day.